Who are you? Near the end of Rita Hayworth's life, she looked directly at her daughter Yasmin and asked her that question. Not a nurse, not a stranger, her own daughter. Alzheimer's had progressed so far that the woman sitting in front of her no longer registered as someone she had raised, loved and known for decades. 4 days after Rita died, Yasmin sat inside the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills as more than 500 people gathered to bury her mother. And there was something almost cruel about that crowd, because millions of strangers had once recognized Rita Hayworth instantly. Soldiers carried her photograph during World War II. Moviegoers knew the red hair, the smile, the black dress, the glove. To an entire generation, you barely had to say her name. You just showed them her face. And that face became so famous that, in 1946, it ended up somewhere almost impossible to believe. On an atomic bomb. Not a movie prop, a real nuclear weapon. The woman Hollywood called a bombshell had become one, literally. But think about the scale of fame required for something like that to happen. Millions of people knew Rita Hayworth's face. Yet 4 decades later, Rita Hayworth could look at her own daughter and ask, "Who are you?" And that is where the story of her funeral really begins. Monday morning, May 18th, 1987, the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills. More than 500 mourners filled the church. Fans, friends, actors, people who had worked with Rita decades earlier. People from a version of Hollywood that was already disappearing. At the front was her coffin, and one of the men carrying it was Glenn Ford. 41 years earlier, Ford had stood opposite Rita in Gilda. Together, they had created one of the defining screen pairings of the 1940s. Now he was carrying her out of a church. Alongside Ford were Ricardo Montalban, Cesar Romero, Tony Franciosa, choreographer Hermes Pan, and family friend Philip Lukenbill. No screenwriter needed to improve that image. Now Glenn Ford was helping Rita Hayworth make her final exit. But the woman remembered inside that church was surprisingly different from Gilda. Actress Jane Withers spoke about knowing Rita before any of this existed, before the red hair, before the bomb, before the prince, before the love goddess. Back in 1935, they had worked together when Rita was still a teenage actress called Rita Cansino. And what Withers remembered was not some fearless future sex symbol. She remembered a girl who was nervous, painfully shy. That may be the most important thing to understand about Rita Hayworth. The woman on the screen and the woman living inside that image were never completely the same person. She supposedly summarized it better than anyone else ever could. Men fell in love with Gilda and woke up with Rita. The line became famous because it sounded witty. It becomes sadder when you know the rest of the story. Rita died on May 14, 1987 in Manhattan. She was 68. By then, Alzheimer's had taken most of her independence. Her speech had deteriorated severely. She needed constant care. In her final months, Yasmin later described a woman who could no longer feed herself normally and whose body was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. By February 1987, Rita had slipped into what was described as a semi-comatose state. The woman who had once communicated with the smallest movement, one glance, one turn, one perfectly timed dance step, was becoming almost completely still. But the disease had not announced itself clearly at the beginning. For years, people thought Rita's problem was something else. They thought she was drinking herself to death. The warning signs had begun much earlier. Rita forgot things. She repeated herself. She became disoriented. Her behavior could suddenly change. People working with her began noticing how difficult it was for her to remember dialogue. On The Wrath of God in 1972, her final movie, people around Rita had to find ways of helping her through lines she could no longer reliably retain. At the time, the explanation seemed obvious. Alcohol, and Rita did drink. That made the story easy to believe. By 1977, court proceedings surrounding her condition focused heavily on alcoholism and her inability to care properly for herself. The headlines were brutal. Once one of Hollywood's most desired women, now a drunken, fading movie star. It was the kind of story newspapers knew how to tell. The problem was that it wasn't the whole story. By the early 1980s, doctors finally had another explanation: Alzheimer's disease. Suddenly, the forgotten dialogue meant something else. The repeated questions meant something else. The mood swings meant something else. The confusion meant something else. Alcohol may have made things worse, but underneath it was a degenerative brain disease that doctors and the public still understood poorly. And by the time it had a name, Rita had already lost years. Knowing the changes the atmosphere of May 18. The people inside that Beverly Hills church weren't simply mourning a star who had grown old. Rita hadn't grown particularly old. She died at 68. They were mourning somebody who had disappeared gradually while still physically present, and Yasmin had witnessed almost all of it. After the church service, the procession headed toward Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City. Rita would be buried there. No royal wedding, no movie cameras, no screaming fans, no studio lighting, just a family following a coffin. Her grave would eventually bear a short inscription, "To yesterday's companionship and tomorrow's reunion." For most people, those words would simply mean, "We'll meet again." For Yasmin, they carried something deeper. She had already lost the companionship before she lost her mother. Alzheimer's had done that first. And there's another reason identity hangs over this funeral. Rita Hayworth wasn't born Rita Hayworth. She was born Margarita Cansino in 1918. She came from a family of dancers and started performing extremely young. But Hollywood looked at Margarita Cansino and decided something about her needed fixing. Actually, several things. Her name was too obviously Hispanic. Her appearance was considered too Mediterranean, so they began rebuilding her. Cansino disappeared. Hayworth arrived. Her dark hair eventually became the famous reddish hair audiences would recognize. And then came something far more extreme. Her actual hairline was altered. Rita underwent extensive electrolysis to move it higher, hair by hair, session after session. The goal was to make her forehead look broader and her appearance less ethnic by the standards of the studio system. Think about that. One of the faces later remembered as a symbol of natural Hollywood beauty had been physically engineered. Margarita Cansino did not simply become famous, she was redesigned into Rita Hayworth. And then the redesign became incredibly valuable. The irony of Rita dying from a disease of memory becomes even stronger when you understand one of her greatest talents. She could dance, not celebrity dancing, really dance. She appeared opposite Fred Astaire in You'll Never Get Rich and You Were Never Lovelier. Astaire was famously demanding. Rita could keep up. She learned complicated routines with remarkable speed, movement, sequences, timing. Remembering what came next, that was part of her professional gift. Then decades later, the same woman struggled to remember a sentence, eventually, a face, eventually, her own daughter. Alzheimer's did not merely attack Rita's memories. It attacked one of the things on which her entire career had been built. And then in 1946 came the movie that swallowed almost everything else, Gilda. Rita Hayworth had already become a major star, but Gilda created something different, a mythology. The entrance, the hair, the black satin, the nightclub, the glove. Audiences weren't simply watching Rita Hayworth anymore. They were watching Gilda. And the character became so inseparable from Rita that only months later came that bizarre atomic bomb episode. An actual nuclear weapon, nicknamed Gilda, Rita's photograph attached to it. The bomb dropped at Bikini Atoll. It sounds like somebody invented the detail after her death to make the story more dramatic. They didn't. And Rita reportedly saw nothing funny about it. Her husband Orson Welles later recalled how upset she became when she learned what had been done. Imagine having your image transformed into a symbol of sexuality, so powerful that someone decides it belongs on a nuclear weapon. Then imagine never really feeling like that woman in private. And Rita's hair produced another extraordinary episode. The red hair had become one of Columbia Pictures' most valuable visual trademarks. Then Orson Welles made The Lady from Shanghai. For the role, Rita's famous long hair was cut short. Then it was bleached blonde. Columbia boss Harry Cohn was furious. The same industry that had once changed Rita's appearance because it disliked Margarita Cansino now hated the idea of changing Rita Hayworth. That is how completely the transformation had worked. Hollywood had changed her hairline, changed her hair color, changed her name. And once the resulting image became profitable enough, the image was treated as though it should never change again. Rita's appearance had become a commercial asset. Even her hair could create a corporate crisis. Then her private life became even more spectacular. In 1949, Rita married Prince Ali Khan. The wedding on the French Riviera was celebrity insanity before celebrity insanity had become normal. Hundreds of guests attended. Accounts describe hundreds of bottles of champagne, dozens of pounds of caviar, an enormous wedding cake. Rita cut it with a glass sword. And at the reception, giant floral initials floated in the swimming pool. One was A for Orly, the other M. Not R for Rita, M for Margarita. The name Hollywood had effectively erased was floating in flowers at one of the most photographed weddings in the world. For a brief moment, Margarita had returned, but the fairy tale did not last. The marriage ended in divorce. Rita ultimately married 5 times: Edward Judson, Orson Welles, Prince Ali Khan, Dick Ames, James Hill. Every marriage ended. She had 2 daughters. She had fame almost beyond comprehension. And yet her personal life repeatedly collapsed under the weight of expectations surrounding the woman everyone thought they knew. Here is another Rita Hayworth fact that seems almost impossible. She appeared in roughly 60 films. She danced with Fred Astaire, worked with Orson Welles, starred opposite Glenn Ford, created Gilda, became one of the defining female images of Hollywood's golden age. The American Film Institute would later rank her among the greatest female screen legends. But Rita Hayworth was never nominated for an Academy Award, not once. Her photograph made it onto an atomic bomb before her name ever made it onto an Oscar nomination ballot. That tells you something about fame. Being unforgettable is not always the same thing as being rewarded. But this is where the story avoids becoming purely tragic. Yasmin did something with what happened to her mother. Before Rita had even died, the Rita Hayworth Gala was created to raise money for Alzheimer's research and support. The first New York event was held in 1984. Over the following decades, galas carrying Rita's name would raise tens of millions of dollars. Eventually, the total passed $90 million, so think about the strange journey of that name. Margarita Cansino was renamed because Hollywood believed Rita Hayworth would sell better. Then Alzheimer's damaged Rita's own memory. And after her death, the invented Hollywood name became attached to millions of dollars devoted to fighting diseases that destroy memory. There is something almost poetic about that. The name created to manufacture a star eventually helped fund attempts to understand the disease that destroyed her. When Rita died, President Ronald Reagan issued a statement praising her and her family's openness about Alzheimer's. He said they had helped bring worldwide attention to the disease, and then history added one more extraordinary turn. 7 years later, Reagan announced that he had Alzheimer's himself. The president, who had publicly praised Rita Hayworth's family for speaking about the disease, eventually had to make the same announcement about his own life. Some coincidences need no dramatic embellishment. Rita's image found one more strange place to survive. In 1982, Stephen King published a story titled Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. The title wasn't random. Inside the story, a poster of Rita Hayworth conceals the beginning of Andy Dufresne's tunnel. The poster hides an escape route. Years later, the film became The Shawshank Redemption. And suddenly, another generation that might never have watched Gilda knew the name Rita Hayworth. There's something strangely fitting about that too. A woman who spent much of her life trapped inside an image became part of one of popular culture's most famous stories about escape. But 4 days after Rita died, Yasmin followed her mother's coffin out of the church. And perhaps that is the real ending. Hollywood had spent a lifetime making sure the world would never forget Rita Hayworth. Her daughter spent the years after her death making sure the world would never forget what happened to her. Because when those 500 people gathered in Beverly Hills, they weren't really saying goodbye to Gilda. They were saying goodbye to the woman underneath her, Rita.